everyone, and welcome to You Ask Me Answers. It's Michelle chiming in, and so thank you so much for joining us today. We'd love for you to chime in the comments. Let me know where you're listening in from. For people who are new, my name is Michelle Wilson. I'm the VP of Movement Building and Leadership Development and Technologies here at Women Engage. And so I'm super excited for this conversation today with everyone. It's really going to be a great time, but I wanted to really just give some shout outs and some updates. So as you continue to pop in, make sure to tune in down in the comments. Let us know where you're listening in from. Another thing to also note is that we also do live tweeting of this event. And so you can follow us on Twitter at Women Engaged. Again, that's on Twitter at Women Engaged. And so I'm so excited that we're going to be talking today about queer reproductive justice. It's such an important topic in terms of the work that we're doing. And so I'm so thankful for you all to be joining us today. And so I see we got some shares going out. Thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate it. We really appreciate it, and making sure that we're getting this information out to people as well. And so I wanted to also mention too, you guys should also subscribe to our YouTube page. We post these videos, recaps, and other things on that page as well. So really hope that you all subscribe to that too. And I see more people are filling in the room. I see you all. As you come in, feel free to pop, say hi in the chat. Tell us where you're listening in from. Again, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited for today. Oh, hey, Lauren. It's so great to have you in the space. Thank you for joining us. This is going to be a really juicy conversation today. And so for folks who didn't see it, Malika Redman, our CEO and co-founder, was featured in Adam Mendler's piece on the qualities of leadership. And so I really highly suggest for people to check that out. It's a really great time. And so thank you all so much. Hello, Alabama. Hello, Shay. Thank you for tuning in. Okay, like, hey there. I'm so thankful. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it. I'm so happy to have you join us today. We're going to have a really good time. I'm really excited for just all the things that are bringing this. So if you have any topics, or anyone else who's listening, if you have any topics of interest that you want us to cover on this show, feel free to pop them in the chat, or you can always send us a DM. We're always looking to open suggestions because we really want these spaces to really serve community, really talking about the issues and digging down deep, right, into the things that really motivate us into action. So thank you so much. All right, I see the room is continuing to fill up. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Go ahead and pop in the chat. Say hi. Tell us where you're listening in from. Okay, we already got Alabama and Kentucky in the house. Yes. Yes. Hello, everyone. So I'm really excited for this conversation. So I mentioned earlier, we're live tweeting this event. You can follow us on Twitter at Women Engage, or you can always subscribe to our YouTube page to check out these videos and past videos as well. All righty. And so I'm just going to hop right into it and start introducing our guest speaker today. And so Khyé Tee, they use they, them pronouns, is an unapologetic Southern queer Black femme who enjoys writing and reading people, subverting the gender binary, and designing underwear for non-binary folk. Khyé is a doula, entrepreneur, healer, writer, consultant, and educator. As the founder of Kuluntu Reproductive Justice Center, founded in 2018, Khyé is working toward a world in which Black women and femmes can live, thrive, and raise healthy families freely within healthy community. Khyé loves to hike, sew, thrift, create art, sing, and dream of a world in which education is intuitive and culturally responsive. They are originally from Nashville, Tennessee, and currently reside in Atlanta. Please welcome our awesome person today, Khyé. Hi.
Hey, y'all.
Yes.
How are you?
My goodness, I'm doing well. So excited to have you here. How are you today?
I'm good. I had a really relaxing morning, so I'm super grateful for that.
Oh my goodness. I'm so here for the relaxing mornings, especially like for folks who are into astrology, especially as we're on the heels of the Mercury retrograde. I'm so here for relaxing mornings.
Yes, I saw something on Instagram and they were like, look, this is like I'm not an astrology person, so I don't know all the details, but they were like, there's so much going on, like, but this is a time to rest and receive. And this like usually full moons and new moons, we're like, all right, we got to do all the intentions and we got to do some spells and we got to like get out there. And it's like, no, this one is supposed to be very receptive. So we should be resting, we should be relaxing. And I was like, say less. So here we are.
Yes, I love it. So I thank you again for just sharing a piece of your day with us. And so let's just hop right into it. If you want to just tell folks who are listening in a little bit more about yourself and what brought you to Kuluntu Reproductive Justice Center.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I am a non-binary person. I identify as a gender if I have to put a word to it, but I just don't. I would rather just opt out of the gender binary completely. Like just don't even binary over here. So I was working in education. I have about 10 years experience working in education, higher education, K through 12, early childhood, like childcare, all the things. And I was working in my 9 to 5, like higher ed job, and this at this particular university, and they were talking about, oh, we care so much about, diversity and inclusion and equity, and they say all the right words, and it sounds nice and flowery, and then I'm talking to Black students in real time, and they're like, yo, they canceled a major that was like mostly Black students. Like they would do little things like that. Very, I don't want to say it's a microaggression because they were big things, but like they were things that the Black students noticed and the Black people tend to be like hyper aware of. And I'm just like, okay, I'm working at this place where, yeah, on the one hand, they say this is what they do. And then on the other hand, this is what they're actually doing. I'm never going to be able to counteract a system. You know what I'm saying? Like people say like, oh, work from within. But I'm like, how am I as one person going to counteract an entire system? And yeah, I might make a few individual students feel good. And like, I'm not going to downplay that, but also like, yeah, the impact that I wanted, I knew it couldn't happen within an institution, within a white supremacist institution, frankly. And so I was looking for a different way to make a more tangible impact. And I started to hear about the maternal mortality crisis. So this was maybe around like 2017. And I'm looking for an out from my life, from my, not from my life, I'm sorry, from my work life. And I'm learning about the maternal mortality crisis and that it's affecting Black women and Black folks more specifically. And, I just so happen to be living in Atlanta, Georgia, which is, Georgia is number 50 as far as maternal mortality. And so I kind of on a whim, but not really, decided to become a doula. And so I actually trained at the same time to become a doula and a childbirth educator. And so it was, I noticed very quickly that it was utilizing a lot of the skills that I already had to be a doula and a childbirth educator. And I was like, this is it. This is what I want to do. And so at the same time, I also did a reproductive justice fellowship with Feminist Women's Health Center. So shout out to them. The Aaron J. Woolley Fellowship. If you get the chance to apply, please do. It's awesome. And I was deepening my knowledge of reproductive justice at the same time. And I was literally in like doula class one week, and then I was in my fellowship class the next week. And I'm like, a lot of these are the same issues, right? We're talking about bodily autonomy. We're talking about consent. We're talking about informed consent and all these different, we're talking about white supremacy. But there was almost no overlap in those two worlds for me. Like the reproductive justice world was very queer and very, very much like bring your whole self to the movement. And then the reproductive health world, the birth work world was very, in Atlanta, there are a lot of Black birth workers, and I know that's not the case in a lot of other places. So birth work can be really white in a lot of places. That wasn't necessarily my experience. Mine was that the birth work world was very hotep, for lack of a better word or phrase. And I was like, yo, it can't be just the hoteps in here, like ushering the babies into the world. Wait a minute. So I'm like, and again, I'm existing in this birth work space. You know, I felt so held, and I felt so accepted in reproductive justice spaces. And then in these birth work spaces, I felt so invisible as a queer non-binary person. And I realized, like, if I'm feeling this way, talking to other doulas, like, how are queer and trans families feeling when they're ready to expand their families? And so that got me to thinking, and that's kind of how it started as Kuluntu Doula. So it's kind of how Kuluntu Doula became Kuluntu Reproductive Justice Center, when I realized that we're not even erased, we're just ignored, queer and trans folks, in so many of the birth work spaces. And I learned so many amazing things from reproductive justice about bodily autonomy, about the right for queer and trans folks to exist in all these spaces fully. And I decided to take up space there and to create a safe haven for queer and trans families, and a center for queer and trans families to go for resources and for folks who understand their journeys a little bit. So yeah, that's a little bit about me and Kuluntu.
I love it. Okay, like I love it because to your point, um, a lot of things are very focused on cisgendered folks, right? I think looking at the health work and stuff, and to your point, really cultivating these spaces and bringing them together. Because I will say that's one thing I really love and appreciate about the reproductive justice movement, is that it's rich and full of so many different experiences, identities, expressions in which people find themselves. And so I
Yeah.
just love that you're bringing this work. I guess for like folks, it's like, what does it really mean though to like queer reproductive health? Like, you know, because there's already these people who are out here who like struggle with even separating sex from gender, or like, you know, like these other kind of ways. I guess like how do you speak to that? Because I know a lot of your work is really about queering these spaces. How does that happen?
Yeah. For me, and I can only speak for me and my journey. I don't want to say this is how you queer reproductive justice. It's just how I am doing it. And I also recognize that the way I'm doing it might not be the best way or the most efficient way, or, you know, whatever else, but it's the way that works for me. And so one big way that I queer reproductive justice is just by existing in those spaces and being brave enough to exist loudly. Because it's real easy, and honestly, sometimes when my social battery is low, I might just kind of, you know, sit and observe. And like, there's nothing wrong with that. But a lot of times, especially in birth work spaces, especially because birth work is like, so I worked at Toys R Us one year seasonally for Christmas. And I always say that that's what like really enraged me for like the feminist movement, like working it, like childhood is so, like, they shove gender down children's throats, and it's so obvious when you're at a toy store, right? Because there's the girl section, and then there's the boy section, and then there's books and Legos and like all the things that apparently don't have genders. And so like I think by the time I was working there, it wasn't boy and girl, but it was definitely still pink and blue, right? It was definitely still coded boy and girl. And so of course the girl section has the cleaning toys, and the boy section has all the action figures. And like at the time, so I'm a nerd, and I still watch children's television, and I will not apologize for that. At the time, I was really into Phineas and Ferb. Great cartoon, just great. But all the Phineas and Ferb toys were in the boys section, and that made me mad, because I was like, not that I was about to buy the toys, I don't go that far, but I was just like, Phineas and Ferb has a lot of different characters. Like, it has a pretty decent gender balance with all the different characters, but all the toys were in the boys section. And like, so think of like Toys R Us, birth work is like all that gender essentialism, just like super concentrated. So just being in birth work spaces sometimes for me can be really triggering, because it's all like, it's not only let's celebrate having uteruses, but it's also let's gender our fetuses and let's gender our babies who are not even, not even like capable of expressing their genders yet. And so like it's just super concentrated, like gender essentialism. And I just like, yeah, just me existing, being like, hey, no, like this is there's another option. We should not do this. Like it's more than just women give birth, first off, just reminding folks of some of those basic things that as a doula, for example, like when I'm working with my clients and, we're talking about all the different options for the type of birth they want to have and the different interventions and, after the baby's born, what happens? I ask them, like, have you thought about the possibility of your baby being intersex? That is queering reproductive, like that is queering the birth work world, because who else is having that conversation? And nobody, it's a boy or it's a girl. And every so often, maybe the ultrasound got it wrong and oops, it's a boy. But how often do you hear my baby's intersex? And honestly, there are a lot of great intersex activists who do work in this area. And I am not necessarily specifically in this area, but I do know that intersex surgeries are performed on babies who cannot consent to those surgeries, who cannot say whether they want their uterus or their testes or, whatever else. Sometimes most of the time, those surgeries are unnecessary. They're not, if the baby has genitalia that are different than what they expect, it's usually not life-threatening. It's usually not something that is going to interfere with normal bodily functioning. It's just a surgery that people get performed on their children because they're not comfortable with that possibility. So even just bringing up the possibility that your baby could be intersex, and are you ready to think about that?
That is so real. And I appreciate just bringing that into the frame because people may not be thinking about that. But I think for context, would you mind just explaining for folks what is intersex?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for calling me out. Sometimes I go and I don't go back and explain. So intersex is we're talking about gender and sex and all the different things, right? So a lot of the times what we learn is that there are two sexes in humans. There is, if we're talking about chromosomes in DNA, then there's XX, which is women, and then, XX, which is female, and XY, which is male, which we commonly associate with women and men, which, cisgender folks were born female and identify as a woman, or born male and identify as a man. So if you are intersex, so there are a plethora of variations in human existence and in lots of biology with other animals and plants and things. And so folks can be born with, instead of XX, maybe XXX, or folks can be born with XXY. People can be born, I think, with like X null, like with just one. I know there are various combinations. So, and it can present in a variety of different ways. So sometimes it is internal as far as internal organs. So uterus, ovaries, fallopian tubes, other internal organs, maybe and I don't know all of the science behind it, but basically, yeah, maybe a baby has a uterus and testes. So the surgery may be to remove the uterus or to remove the testes and to give the child a more quote unquote normal presentation. Or externally, the baby could have a vulva and a penis, or the baby could have testes and a clitoris, or some combination, because when fetuses are developing, they all start out as quote unquote female until a certain point. I'm not going to tell you an exact week number and lie to y'all, but until a certain point, and then babies start to develop, usually as either male or female. But like I said, there are so many different variations, and intersex is the umbrella term for all the different variations that could exist. And so, yeah, for the most part, being intersex is not a medical concern. It's just something to be aware of, and to know as you're navigating through life.
I appreciate that. I think you did well. That was great. Like, that was a great explanation to that. And like, to just looking at it as an umbrella. And so I'm going to lift up a question that we got in the chat.
Yeah, please.
So we have a question. They say, do you think there's a degree of shame that comes to a parent who has an intersex child? And if so, how do you combat that ingrained response?
I think there can be shame. I think shame can be an emotion that comes up in addition to grief. Because I know learning about my parents growing up and getting older and deepening my relationship with them and understanding of them and realizing that they, parents have expectations for their children. And even starting as, as soon as they find out that they're having a baby, they might start to lump these expectations on their child. And then having an intersex child might burst that bubble, or it might, those expectations might go out the window. And I think parents need to have space to grieve that. And I think also a lot of parents who maybe aren't in this world of reproductive justice where we're thinking about these kind of things. If you're just going along your day and you're a cisgender woman and you're married to a cisgender man, and all of a sudden you have an intersex child, and the only thing you know is the gender socialization that you've been presented with, then yeah, I can imagine there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of grief, there's a lot of, what does this mean? That, since I've never heard of it, or I've heard of, so the old term, and this term is not okay to use, but the old medical term for intersex folks was hermaphrodite. And that's a term that maybe some folks have heard like within a historical context, or, whatever the case is. And so like people just don't have the information, which then tends to make people nervous, if not afraid. And so, yeah, I think there's a whole lot of emotions that go with that, shame definitely being one of it. But I think I would say one way to combat that is to just have information, useful information, and create space for folks to go through those emotions. And I think that's where a doula comes in. Like, I don't want to be that person that's like, and that's why you need a doula. But also, like, that's where a doula comes in, because like WebMD, and like, if you're not the type of person that like knows how to research things well, like even if you are the type of person, you can get overwhelmed with all that information. And so like a doula or a birth worker, or a counselor, or someone who has some information, like, hey, here's some, scientifically proven information about, being intersex and how these things are not harmful, how intersex folks can live. Here's some curated resources that you can learn about, here's some other parents of intersex folks. Like, you're not alone. There's nothing wrong with you. You didn't do anything wrong. And there are resources to help you. I think those are the biggest things.
I think that was beautiful, especially there around like, like you didn't do anything wrong. Like, having somebody there who's in your corner, really, coaching you through these kind of things. And so I really just appreciated how you brought that together. I guess like, cause like for me, this is what I was like, for me, I understand like birth workers as the umbrella term, but then it's like, what are some of the key differences between like midwifery and doula? And is it possible for both that person to be the same person? Or I guess if you could just speak to that a little bit, because I know we're talking about birth workers, and then we got doulas, and then some people hear about midwives, and people are like, well, they all do the same thing. And it's like, no, there's some key differences there. So I didn't know if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So, birth worker is an umbrella term there are a lot of different types of folks who work with birthing families, with newborns. So we hear about doulas often. And doula it's a term that has a sordid past. It low-key means slave woman, but basically a doula by occupation in 2021 is someone who has been, so it's not, a lot of doulas are not necessarily trained because the task of being a birth companion is also a very ancestral role. So it's, this person has information. So if you come to me and you say, hey, I've been having a lot of heartburn, I can say, this is what this can mean. Here's some natural remedies that you don't have to worry about, taking a whole bunch of medications while you're pregnant. And, here's some ways to reduce the chances of getting heartburn. And your baby's going to have a lot of hair. So we have the education piece. We have the, like I said, a lot of us have that ancestral piece, especially Black and brown birth workers. And so, we'll bring that spiritual piece as well. Because birth is such it's one of the big things in life. Birth and death are the two transitions, right? And they're both so sacred, and they're both so beautiful, and they're both so spiritual, and there's so all these different things. And I know for me, I don't know if all birth workers identify in this way, but I see myself as like a guardian and someone who creates spaces for folks to go through those transitions in a beautiful way, and in a way that they envision, and in a way that feels good to them. Because a lot of the times what we hear is about trauma, and we hear about harm and death, and and actually we don't hear about trauma, we only hear about death. So for every, if we think about, if there's 700 people that die during or within 6 weeks after childbirth, how many more people were harmed but didn't die? How many more infants were harmed but didn't die? How many more, death is not oh, everybody's alive, great job. No, you know how many people, whole families have been harmed, traumatized, have been dissuaded from wanting to have more children because of these experiences. They're scared to death. They're going into this sacred, beautiful moment scared to death. And I tell people, when you're pregnant, your baby is literally growing from you. So your baby knows if you're scared. I know for me, when I'm scared, I get tense. I can feel my stomach clench, my lower abdomen. I'm gesturing. I know y'all can't see it, but I'm my lower abdomen is clenching. Guess where that baby is? That baby feels you clenching, and that baby says, oh, it's not safe for me to be born yet. So let me chill for a few more hours until it's safe. And then what happens? C-section. Oh, failure to progress, C-section, and then pulmonary embolism. It's now I'm just ranting because I don't even remember the question, but it's just out of the white supremacy handbook. It's just yeah. And birth doulas are, oh, that was the question. I remember. Okay, I'm back. Doulas and birth workers are the guardians of those spaces. But there are other types of birth workers. So there's lactation consultants who specifically work with folks with lactation, chest feeding, breastfeeding. And there are a couple different types of lactation consultants. There are also folks who are trained in sleep, infant sleep. There are pelvic floor therapists, which if you are pregnant, having a baby, have had kids, go see a pelvic floor therapist. Yes, that is crucial. There are chiropractors who work with pregnant folks and infants, massage therapists, anyone who works with pregnant families or infants, I consider a birth worker. But then a midwife is a medically trained professional. So a midwife is, so there are two different types of midwives in most states. There are nurse midwives who go to nursing school, and then they become an RN, and then they go to 2 extra years, I believe, of midwifery school, in addition to becoming an RN. So a midwife is, if you're on the labor and delivery floor of the hospital, there are the nurses that are registered nurses, and they come and they check on you, but then there might be a midwife who basically went to 2 extra years of nursing school to specialize in childbirth. And so they work in the hospitals, and not all OBGYN offices or practices work with midwives, but a lot of them do. And that's kind of a growing practice, that the practice might have 3 doctors, 2 or 3 midwives, and they might even have a doula on staff or a lactation consultant or something along those lines. But yeah, the midwife is the medically trained provider. And then the second type of midwife is a certified professional midwife, or what they call a lay midwife. And lay midwives are those ancestrally, I don't want to say ancestrally trained, but trained by maybe the community midwife who came before them. So that's what we think of when we think of back in the day, the midwives who were delivering babies, in small town Georgia, and Aunt May delivered all the babies in town. Those are the community midwives or the professional midwives, and so they may or may not have nursing training, formalized nursing training, but they may perform home births usually, or births within birthing centers. So I hope that helps. I know I went off on a little tangent.
No, that's okay. Look, I love the tangent, okay, because it's definitely important. Like, first of all, thank you for answering the question, but also to, in what I'm hearing is that, like, really the importance of having someone who's going to be there to advocate with you, who has done the research with you, especially in these moments, because navigating particularly healthcare is a very scary thing, especially for Black folks, Black women, Black femmes, non-binary, and trans folks who are having children.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that that's definitely what I was getting from it, and really understanding too, like some of those structural elements that make things stressful. Like when, I always, for me, my go-to is about the case around Selena Williams and almost her dying in childbirth. And you have somebody who's like a professional athlete who
Yeah.
intimately knows their body, routinely gets checkups, and is telling these people, hey, something's going on. And they're like, oh no, it must be in your leg. And she's like, no, this is what you need to do. And they're
Right.
like, oh snap, it's not in your leg. We got to hurry up and do this because you could possibly die. And she's like, really? I couldn't tell you. Like, like I think
Yeah.
I always think about those instances too. And so I appreciate you just for sharing that and really getting into it, because that's definitely what I love bringing up, and just also to lifting up, like a couple people have also shared this in chat, the work that you're doing is just so important to what we have going on. And so thank you so much for just sharing that and sharing those realities. I guess, like, in turn to, like, as we start talking about like queering birth work, queering RJ, queering reproductive healthcare, I guess, can you tell us a little bit more about just like the journey that queer people, in particular, people who are trans, who are non-binary, folks who are navigating, birth, right?
Yeah.
And the experience, and why it's so important to have a doula or a birth worker who's really grounded in some affirming care, right? Because I can only imagine how alienating it is, to your point, like you mentioned earlier, sometimes the hoteps, okay? The hoteps, for people who don't know, there's a lot of great meme culture on that.
Yes.
But then also too, just a lot of the very cis normative
Yes.
approaches to it. So I guess, like, if you could speak a little bit to that, about like what is that journey like, and that importance about having someone, a birth worker, who's really grounded in just affirming people.
Yeah. So it's hard to say what any one journey looks like, because I think, if for anyone who's in the queer community and trans community knows, like, every single one of us have radically different journeys, different identities. Me and somebody else could have on the same outfit, and I'm a femme and they might be a butch, and we standing there and I'm like, you know what? We're here. Like, and like, so our identities are so individual, and our journeys and our lives are so individual, and it's so, like, rudimentary. It's just so basic to say that, like, all of us are different. Like, all of us have our own journeys, and all of us have our own experiences. And so, like, I guess I can give you 2 or 3 different pictures of people. So we'll say that there is a queer couple. They both identify, well, okay, one person in the couple is a lesbian. The other person in the couple is a trans man. They're both Black. They're both in Georgia. So the person in the couple who identifies as a lesbian is the person who's going to be carrying the baby. So we're not necessarily going to be, thinking about hormones and all those different things. And I know that's what a lot of folks think of at first. They're like, oh, trans people, trans men having babies. Like it's a catchy headline, right? It's like seeing the picture. It's a very, like, I don't want to say startling, but it's kind of like it's the image that we think of. But sometimes it's just like, we're all just people, right? And not to say that trans men having babies shouldn't also be supported. Absolutely. That's a growing group who is expressing their experiences, and I'm really grateful that they are doing that. And there are still other queer and trans folks who are sliding through the cracks, who don't quite have that same experience. So yeah, the partner who identifies as a lesbian wants to get pregnant. So the first thing they have to figure out is, what parts do we have and what parts do we need, right? Like what, and I think that goes with anyone, if these were two cis men or if these were two genderqueer folks, what body parts do we have and what body parts do we need, or what, do we need to get sperm? Do we need to find a surrogate? Do we need to, do we need to do the, what's it called? It left, but do we, and then with those thoughts of surrogates or sperm donors or egg donors or what have you, then it's like, do you want a known donor? Do you want an unknown donor? Do you want, then we get into some of the iffy things, right? Like, do we want someone who looks like us, or are we more open to someone, maybe we want the person to be Black, but we don't necessarily need them to look like us. So then, like, if we are both dark skinned and we're proud of being dark skinned, do we want to make sure we have a donor who is a dark skinned person? And that's where some of those intersections are coming in, because as a Black person, like, telling a white doula that, they would be like, I can only imagine what their reaction would be. And like, they would need you to like explain some things. Like, girl, I ain't got time for that. Like, we're Black and I need you to know that, we don't want no high yellow babies. Like, got it. Boom, let's go. Like, it's that cultural knowledge of like, there's no pretense. I don't have to explain all of that. And so that might be what one journey looks like. And so then once they get the sperm, there's ovulation tracking, there's the action of getting pregnant, and whether or not, how many rounds of ovulation you might have to go through. And then once they get pregnant, then they're going to their OBGYN, who's calling them mom every time they come around, every time they come around the corner. Hey mom, how are you feeling? Hey mom, how's it going? And like, whether or not that feels good to them. If their partner, I know a lot with, with the pandemic and everything, partners aren't able to go to all the doctor's appointments, but if the partner is able to go to the doctor's appointment, do I have to worry about my partner being misgendered? Do I need to worry about, people asking me weird questions? Do I need to worry about, if my partner's not there, do I need to worry about people assuming that I have a husband, or assuming that, assuming basically, right? And then, for a lot of femmes, like, do I show up as visibly queer? Or, for a lot of folks, like, how do I show up? How do I dress? Do I want them to think I'm queer, or do I just want to fly under the radar and go home? How comfortable do I feel talking to them about my family structure? I also want to uplift polyamorous families. How do I talk to them about my family structure when we have 3, 4, 5 co-parents, and we already have 3 or 4 kids in the family, but this is my first baby. So, just the layers that a lot of us as queer and trans folks, like, we don't fit nicely into a lot of those boxes, and how much explanation and how much, or how easy or how difficult would it be to find an affirming provider? In Atlanta, it might be easier to find an affirming provider, and it might be easier to find a Black provider. It might be a little bit more difficult to find an affirming Black provider, or it might be a little bit more difficult to find those certain intersections, whatever you need. If you have a pre-existing health condition, you know, you need to find different specialists that can help you with different things going through your pregnancy. Then every time you have to find a different provider, okay, are you going to be affirming to my family? Are you going to be, you know, are you going to be, you know, terrible to my partner or not? Like all these different things. So, you know, that's an example of one family's journey and what that could look like. And then, of course, you know, there are folks who are trans and have gone through, whether it's medical transition, hormonal transition, what have you, and who need to navigate that. And one thing that I found out maybe like a year and a half ago, like providers, healthcare providers who are working with trans folks as far as like transitioning aren't necessarily talking to them about their fertility options. And it's, at first I thought, well, maybe, you know, a lot of times they're young people who are going through transition and maybe they're just not thinking about it. But like, no, if someone with a uterus was 16 years old and something had happened, maybe they had, you know, cysts or something, and the doctor said we have to do a full hysterectomy, then they would talk to that 16-year-old about their fertility options. So the fact that a lot of them are not doing that with trans and non-binary folks, even if you are 15, 16, 17, 19, that doesn't mean that you don't want to have kids. That doesn't mean that you don't want to think about the possibility. You know, it's about giving folks options. So a lot of folks, you know, say you've been on hormones since you were 22, you're 33, and now you and your partner want to have a kid, and you're trying to figure out, okay, how does this even work? And there's not a lot of research out there. There is a growing amount of research. If you look, a lot of that research has probably come out within the last 4 to 5 years. But a lot of, you know, they're not talking to each other, these different areas of healthcare. And then the endocrinologist is focused on the one thing, you know, and the OBGYN is focused on the one thing. And like, there's very little overlap. There's very little conversation about how do hormones affect, even if they are reversible, will they affect, you know, say sperm potency, or will they affect egg potency or what have you? And so a lot of those conversations, we just don't know, you know, what are the long-term effects? We know that there can be liver and kidney issues with long-term effects of taking hormones, but what about reproductively? And just the assumption, I guess, that trans folks and queer folks don't want to have children and don't want to build their families is, you know, it's, you know, how many people's fertility could have been preserved in some way, but wasn't, you know, and that's just not okay. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
No, it does. And I appreciate that. I learned though, because I had never thought about the lack of conversations that were happening around reproductive health and the options that people have, especially for those who are transitioning, right?
Absolutely.
Like I didn't, that's why I said, like, look, I'm learning me something today. So no, I'm here for all of this information gathering. And so I'm going to lift up another question we got in the chat.
Yeah, please.
Kind of going back to the intersex question. So someone had been talking to their partner and they were discussing their ideas about leaving an intersex child unaltered. So they want to know, what are the risks of leaving a child unaltered versus having a surgery performed to conform to the mainstream?
That I am not qualified to answer that question. A lot of the medical nuts and bolts I am not familiar with. Now I can find some articles and send them to you, or I can point you to some resources, but I cannot answer that myself. But I encourage you, like, that's something that I encourage you to look at and you know, see if you can find a provider who will honestly have that conversation. Not to say the provider's just out here lying, but coercion is a word I would use. Like, there's a lot of just like coercion, and like the way that information is presented can be problematic. So like finding a provider, or, you know, a nurse maybe, or someone, if you know any queer trans healthcare providers or folks who work in the medical industry, to maybe talk to you a little bit about that. You know, someone who will give you unbiased information could be really helpful.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for lifting that up. And so I'd love for us to talk a little bit more about some of the offerings that you all have at the center. So you started in 2018.
Yeah.
Just love for us to just talk a little bit more about some of the amazing things that you all have going on.
Yeah, so yeah, we've been going since 2018. We started with in-person events with Meet the Doulas was the first event that we did, and then we had, I think that's where we met, the Healing Justice for Reproductive Justice event. Yeah, it was a really cool healing event that I got to put on for the folks who are going up to the Capitol every day and working against the abortion ban. And so there was like art therapy and yoga and chair massages and tarot, and it was cute. And then, of course, so we were having some cute events. There was also a queer and trans family event for folks to build a community that we had a couple of times. And then, of course, COVID hit. So we are all virtual. So I am providing virtual birth work. So if anyone is looking for a labor and delivery doula or a fertility doula, I do those, or an abortion doula also. I perform those virtually and then like in person for certain things. And then we're online at Kuluntu RJC on Instagram. That is where I'm most active. I am here on Facebook a little bit, so you can search Kuluntu Reproductive Justice Center, or it's facebook.com/Kuluntu RJC, and that's our page on here. So there's a lot of information sharing on social media, but the main thing right now that I'm uplifting is I created an on-demand self-paced course called Introduction to Reproductive Justice. So it is a 4-part course because I'm very extra and I cannot rein it in. So we're doing an intro to reproductive justice, to birth justice, the maternal mortality crisis and the context within the United States, and queer and trans literacy for folks who are birth workers or working in the healthcare field with pregnant folks, with families, with infants, anyone along those lines. And it gives you an overview of the context of the situation that we're in with the maternal mortality crisis, and actual tangible things that we can do to be better and do better by Black folks, by queer and trans folks in an industry that is really behind, that uses a lot of racist, outdated information that doesn't benefit us, that is actively killing us. So I created this course series for folks to be able to learn how to do better, because I know the medical system ain't gonna teach us how to do better. So somebody got to do it. So yeah, that's my main thing. That's what I've been pushing. That's what I've been talking about all the time. So yeah, that's what we doing. We got some other stuff going on, like some discussion groups and stuff, but that's our main thing right now.
No, I appreciate that. And I definitely will say, like, y'all, that healing event was life. Okay. Like, and it was such a great time. So I just appreciate all of your offerings, and also to your ability to adapt, of course, into what we're dealing with. And so I know we're about 10 minutes out from the hour, and I could talk to you literally all day. But like, I always love to end these sessions with just like some time to talk about self-care and balance, like, especially now around we're still about a year and a half in, everything's going on. And to just let people know out there that we're people, like, we're people,
Right?
and we need to do like people things to make sure that we're maintaining. So I didn't know if you would like to share a little bit of some of the things that you're practicing right now that are bringing you joy or relaxation, those kind of things.
So I have a few things. So I do yoga. I try to do it at least twice a week. I love my YouTube yogis. Like, I will be in the living room and set up my yoga mat in a hot second. And that really just helps me, like, when I'm on my yoga mat, it helps me just like focus on that moment, and everything else can just like, it'll be there when I get back. But this 30 minutes is for me to relax and not worry about all the problems and all the things in the world. I also play the ukulele, and I tell people about it all the time, because like I always have been like vaguely musically inclined, but never really like, stuck with any one thing for long enough to actually become good at it. But the ukulele, it is an affordable hobby. You can get a brand new ukulele on, I know, God forbid, Amazon, but you can get it on there for like $60. And there's apps that you can, they have a whole bunch of different songs that you can learn. So I've been learning all the different songs on the ukulele, and I have been telling everybody else to get a ukulele so we can have a ukulele jam sesh in the park when everything is safe. And that just like, yeah, like I do art and different things. And like sometimes with art, there's so much pressure to like for it to be good. And sometimes with some of my hobbies, I feel that pressure. And so like ukulele, I can sing off key. I can get the notes wrong. And like, if the song comes out vaguely sounding like it's supposed to sound, I get excited. So like, it's a very like, it's something that just allows me to like play and truly just like have fun. I also have lots of house plants. There's some behind me, if you can see them. So I love taking care of my plants and like propagating them and watching them grow and all of that. And I'm very much like learning. And I just killed a plant like last week, but I'm still like, there's something healing about not only like physically like working in the dirt, but just like seeing something grow and like understanding plants have also helped me understand life and death a lot more, and just like death is a part of life and it's just as natural as anything else. And like, I don't know, my plants, I'm always like learning lessons from my plants. So those are my big things that keep me from just like snapping on people on a daily basis.
Oh my gosh, I love it. Like I almost now want to get a ukulele. Like I almost now want to get a ukulele. Just because like what didn't know that they were like $60, but also like that just seems like fun. And a jam session in the park just sounds like it would be the
Right?
best time. Oh my gosh. And definitely feel you on the plants. I had some plants. I have officially killed them. I feel bad. I successfully last year propagated some basil and I
Okay.
was super proud of it. And it was growing and doing all this stuff and even survived the winter, but did not make it to the spring. Like
Basil is
so
hard though. Try something a little bit easier than basil. Basil is very
it happened
difficult.
by accident. So I had gotten it from a local farmer and I was just trying to keep it fresh. So I kept putting it in water and it wasn't dying. So I was like, I would just pick a couple leaves every now and then. And after a couple weeks, I was like, are these roots? I was like, well, I guess I'm keeping basil now. So,
That's
like
beautiful.
it just come like it just happened by accident. It was not like oh, I'm gonna grow some basil. It was just like, oh, it's propagated. Okay.
Yes.
And so, I mean, I applaud you in being a plant mom because it's not in me. Okay, it's not in me. But I just again appreciate you so much for being here with us and for folks who are listening. The links to the courses that Khyé has mentioned are also there as well as their social media, their website. Make sure to check them out. And so before we close it out, Khyé, I didn't know if there was any last thing that you wanted to tell folks or say anything here. And so yeah.
Um, I feel pressure to say something real deep. Let me see. Focus on your healing and everything else will come after. Healing and rest and play. I feel like those are the three main things. If you can keep those in a good balance, then I think that'll take you far.
I love it. Focus on that healing, rest, and play. Y'all heard it here, y'all. So thank you, Khyé, so much for being with us this week. And thank you, everyone, for listening into this amazing conversation and the awesome work that is happening at the Kuluntu Reproductive Justice Center. And so make sure that you stay engaged with that. You have the link, sign up with that. And this is another reason about why we're really fighting for reproductive justice for all folks. It's so important that our communities are getting that culturally gender affirming care that really understands the things that we need from that structure, but also working towards dismantling a lot of the systems that are really hurting our people, that really contribute to this maternal mortality. And that we're really just, again, bringing it to where our folks can live in safe and sustainable communities. And that definitely starts when we're talking about the journey of birth. And so thank you again, Khyé. Thank you to everybody who's listening. Make sure to check out our YouTube page. You can recap this just in case you have to dip in and out. We understand. And we'll see you all again next week for our next episode. Until then, I hope everybody has a great day. If you're doing anything this weekend, make sure you stay safe. But I hope you get to get out in the sun, enjoy some weather. And of course, what Khyé said is have some rest, some joy, and some play. Okay. So have a good day, everyone. Bye.